This is On Assignment.
Now, a behind-the-scenes look. Hey everyone, I'm Alex Villarreal here with Imran Siddiqui, and we're taking you on assignment.
Tensions simmer between Sudan and South Sudan. We talk with VOA State Department correspondent about the standoff.
What will the pull out of foreign forces mean for the women of Afghanistan? We'll hear from Afghan activists.
A new oil pipeline for China is being built across Burma. What does it mean for the locals?
And the foreign minister of Brazil sits down with VOA for a one-on-one conversation about his country's status in the world.
These are the stories behind the stories, so join us as we go on assignment.
We focus first on the ongoing conflict between Sudan and South Sudan. Tensions have remained high between the two nations since the South split from the North last year, especially over the key issue of oil. Border clashes last month even raised fears of an all-out war.
But as On Assignment's Doug Bernard found out from VOA State Department correspondent Scott Stearns, an unexpected source has come forward to try to end the dispute, a development that has Washington delighted.
Scott Stearns, explain to us, help us understand what is going on these days in this region of Sudan known as Kordofan.
Southern Kordofan and Blue Nile are areas of what remains the Republic of Sudan, where many people fought alongside the SPLA and the SPLM in the long civil war against the government in Khartoum. But as part of the comprehensive peace agreement that ended that war in 2005, those areas, because they're north of the essentially British colonial demarcation line, those areas were not allowed to secede with the South and join South Sudan in independence last July. So they remained part of the Republic of Sudan. It's difficult for aid agencies to get into that area because the government of Sudan is not letting people into that area.
The Arab League is joining the United Nations and African Union in trying to convince Khartoum to allow international aid agencies into southern Kordofan and Blue Nile. U.S. officials say that could help ease the conflict there.
The government in Khartoum says, well, you know, there is an ongoing rebellion in southern Kordofan and Blue Nile, so we're not sure about opening humanitarian access. The issue is further complicated by Khartoum's allegation, I think correctly, that the new government of South Sudan is supporting militia in southern Kordofan and Blue Nile, and South Sudan's, I think again, correct allegation that the North is supporting cross-border raids into South Sudan.
If they want to change the regime in Khartoum, we will work to change the regime in Juba. If they want to support rebels, we will support rebels there.
So you have these two regions and these two presidents, Salva Kiir in South Sudan and Omar al-Bashir in Sudan, making allegations of rebel incursions across this border territory. This must make this region tremendously dangerous, I would think.
Especially because it has a history, a long history of civil war and humanitarian crises. The great hope, obviously, with the creation of South Sudan, but I think that their ambitious development agenda is already imperiled less than a year since their independence, largely because this hostility has led to the closure of oil production. Oil is central to the economy of South Sudan and important to the economy of Sudan itself. South Sudan made the decision to suspend oil production in January because of what it said were excessive fees that Khartoum was imposing to use northern pipelines and the Port of Sudan to export its oil. The African Union, the United States, and the United Nations are trying to work out the resumption of that oil production and that oil export, because as much as 98% of the budget of South Sudan depends on oil export.
Oil and security topped the agenda during South Sudanese President Salva Kiir's visit to Beijing.
We believe oil is the economic lifeline for both Sudan and South Sudan. Maintaining the stability and sustainability of oil cooperation is fundamental to the interests of both countries and is consistent with the interests of Chinese enterprises.
Now, half a world away, Beijing has a keen interest in what ordinarily might just be a border skirmish between two neighbors. What is China's role in all of this?
China is the largest investor in oil on both sides of the border, so clearly has a big economic interest. But in the last few years, we have seen China's involvement in Africa be pretty much hands-off of political and human rights issues. China has said, we're here to help you develop, but sort of what goes on politically, we're really not going to be involved in. This situation between South Sudan and Sudan has been a real change. China has become much more actively engaged in trying to resolve some of these outstanding border and citizenship issues between Sudan and South Sudan because it knows that there will be no oil from either side of the border until these issues are resolved.
And this is a very different role for China, which ordinarily is preaching non-intervention in other countries' affairs. How does Washington see all of this playing out?
Washington is very encouraged by this role that China is playing, and unlike some other areas like Guinea, maybe Congo and Zambia, where the U.S. has been sort of unsure of China's role in these things, I think the State Department has been very encouraged by this. Now, is this ultimately about making the oil flow again and meeting China's economic demands? Okay, well, you know, that's a large part of it. But people in the human rights communities who study both China and Africa believe it also includes part of China's desire to show African countries that it's not just about oil and that it's not just about natural resources, but that China is interested in Africa in the long run and in helping Africans resolve their problems. So it's a win-win for China.
Well, Scott Stearns, I know you'll be following this very closely from the State Department. Thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
All right, again, that was VOA's State Department correspondent Scott Stearns talking with On Assignment's own Doug Bernard.
We're taking a break now. When we come back, we'll look at why some Afghan women say they fear the end of foreign forces in their country. You're watching On Assignment.
This is the Voice of America. Take a picture for
VOA Special English, a way to learn American English and much more. Broadcasting news and features around the world on radio, television, and on the web at voaspecialenglish.com. For 50 years, helping people understand world events and the language and culture of America.
The Voice of America is offering online English lessons. The Classroom is Voice of America's new online English classroom. From the VOA homepage, click on Learning English and then click on the Classroom to start learning English. In the Classroom, you will find current news articles with customized English language lessons, English language activities for beginning, intermediate, and advanced English speakers, interactive word books and dictionaries under the Interactive Learning tab, and English programs showing you how English is really spoken, and English lessons available for teachers all over the world to use in their classrooms. Learn English with Voice of America. Click on the Classroom to start learning English today.
In Chicago this month, NATO leaders focused their annual summit on Afghanistan and plans to withdraw all foreign combat forces by the end of 2014. But human rights groups say Afghan women have been left out of that conversation. VOA's Aru Pande spoke with activists who say that gains made in women's rights could be erased once foreign troops leave the country. Aru, thank you so much for joining us in studio.
No problem.
So you were there during the summit in Chicago. You went to another gathering that these activists were holding on the sidelines, what they were calling a shadow summit. Why are they so concerned that Afghanistan won't sustain these changes once foreign troops leave?
Well, in a nutshell, they're afraid that the Taliban, who were ousted with the U.S.-led invasion in 2001, will return to power in some form. And for them, they've seen women back in school, back in the workplace, and they're afraid all these things that they've gained are going to go away. So it is a big concern for them.
Well, thank you. We're going to go ahead and hear from those activists now. Let's take a look at Aru Pande's report from Chicago.
Like so many Afghans, Manisha Nadari has very real concerns about the fate of her country after 2014, when international combat troops complete their withdrawal from Afghanistan after more than a decade of war.
The whole country can fall apart. Civil war can ensue again. Everything that we have gained in the last 10 years can be undone if the U.S. and NATO leaves too fast and too abruptly.
Women in Afghanistan have gained a number of rights since the Taliban-led government was ousted in 2001. Under Taliban rule in the 1990s, women in Afghanistan were not allowed to work, get an education, or even leave their homes without a male escort. A great deal has changed since then.
After the remove of the Taliban from the power, with the support of international community and NATO, women start to work, the girls return to school, and women work at the public space and also in the government bodies.
Let's go. But Afghan and international human rights activists worry this progress will be quickly erased once foreign troops leave. On the sidelines of the NATO summit in Chicago, Amnesty International issued an open letter urging U.S. President Barack Obama and Afghan President Hamid Karzai to keep their promise to safeguard women's rights and freedoms. Officials here at this shadow summit for women say history has shown that societies with empowered, educated, and engaged women are the ones that enjoy peace, prosperity, and good governance.
We have to figure out why and to persuade everybody that having women's rights and women in, being on various groups is the best way to ensure a better life for everybody, not just for women, but for everybody.
With 3 million girls currently in school and roughly a third of parliamentary seats held by women, Amnesty and other groups now want to see women make up 30% of the negotiating teams involved in peace talks to end the Afghan war. In Chicago, Aru Pande, VOA News.
So, Aru, in this letter that we saw in your report by Amnesty International, what is it exactly that they're asking for?
They just want a seat at the table. With the Afghan government and U.S. officials negotiating a peace with the Taliban insurgents, they want to make sure they're involved. They want 30%. They want to be on those negotiating teams that are trying to negotiate peace. They want to make sure there's a trust fund in place. So when international troops do leave, there are programs there to support women's rights. And they basically just want equality, and they want to be supported, and they want to make sure the international community hears them.
Absolutely. We'll be watching that closely. Thank you so much, Aru. Coming up next, a controversial oil pipeline in Burma. We talk with our reporter in the region. You're watching On Assignment.
This agency quotes the country's election commission as great criticism, anti-gay measures having...
Coming in first thing in the morning, I get down to my desk, get into my computer and just check all the stories we have.
I will come to work in the morning and of course hit the ground running.
Yes.
That part of the morning is really crazy for me, but that's how it is. I've gotten used to it.
Hey, spares no details about how... I'm so self-conscious. When we come in, we want to make sure the table looks shiny.
Oh, somebody was having a party on this table.
Dimi and I, we have a chemistry and we work together very well.
Spencer is just an easygoing guy, and sometimes I like to kind of pull his coattails a little bit and just try to shake him up.
Hello, I'm Vincent McCory.
And I'm Dimiake Mokaliele. This is In Focus. Every time I get on the set, when I hear that you're on. Hard as it might be to believe, I am a nervous wreck inside because I always feel it's just a question of the prompter stopping and me not finding my words on the page and what will happen.
The world's most dangerous conflict. VOA's Chris Simpkins has more. I think the best part is just knowing that you have an audience out there that is expecting you to tell them these stories, being able to relate to them these stories in a way that makes them feel informed. Kumaraswamy's legal action against rebel leaders.
Jimmy and Vincent enjoy each other. It's a very warm friendship.
They're joking. They have this great rapport. This is in focus. This is in focus.
He's half the face, I am half the face of the show.
The two of us together make it feel like the show is whole.
In Burma, workers are building one of the most lucrative foreign-funded development projects in the country's history.
Twin oil and gas pipelines will stretch from Burma's west coast to its northeast border and into China. The pipelines are expected to earn Burma about $1 billion per year, but not everyone is a supporter.
VOA's Daniel Schearf went to Mandalay to find out what people on the ground in Burma are saying about this huge project. Let's take a look.
Basically, the opposition is rooted in the fact that a lot of people were not allowed to put their input into the project. They weren't allowed to make the decision whether or not this pipeline went through their villages, through their neighborhoods, and a lot of villagers have been forced to move away from the area in order to allow the pipeline to go through. Land has been confiscated, so people have not been brought into the discussion. It's been pretty much the government and the foreign companies, mainly the Chinese, building the actual pipeline, who've been making the decision and then implementing it.
And when we talk about criticism towards the project, we're also talking about the business community. The business community is upset that too much of Chinese investment has come into Burma.
Yeah, that's in recent years in Mandalay City in particular, there's been a growing amount of Chinese investment, a lot of it coming from mainland China. And what that's done is, at first, it brought in a lot of commerce, and of course, people were excited to have more trade coming in, but the Chinese have steadily been buying up more land around the area. They've been taking over businesses. They've been taking over farms. So there's an overall sense that the Chinese are pushing aside a lot of the local businessmen, and that they're no longer able to keep up with the Chinese. And so there's a lot of resentment that's built up against China.
You also had a chance to interview some of the monks, and the monks were pretty upset with regards to their property.
Yeah, that's right. We went to one monastery in particular just outside of Mandalay, and we spoke with the head monk there. Monks at the Asia Alinyong Monastery in Pianuluin Township were initially offered nothing for part of their property until the news media published their complaints. Head monk Usain Ditha says local farmers are too afraid to speak out.
The government will take their land and continue pipeline construction, whether they agree to it or not. That is why they try to be content with the compensation. Nobody wants to give up their land.
And he told us the story about what happened to their monastery. Essentially, the Chinese company came in, local authorities backing them up, and said, we're going to take this part of your land. Now, eventually, the local media, local newspaper got wind of the story, and once that word had spread, then the authorities were in a really tough position, and they were forced to give over some compensation for that land. Of course, the monks still had no choice. The land was going to be taken no matter what, but at least they were able to get some compensation, whereas initially the land was essentially just being taken from them.
Can they do that? Can they force these guys to just give up their lands without any compensation, just by force?
Well, initially that's exactly what they were doing. The government in Burma has a considerable amount of power. I mean, it's been run by the military for decades. But, this case does show that things may be changing. The monk The head monk was able to make some noise, and then eventually they did get some compensation at least, although they still had to give up their land without any choice.
The National Petroleum Corporation is planning to set up clinics for the people. Those clinics, will they be set up within those areas where the pipeline will pass?
That's right. The Chinese company that's involved in this, the China Petroleum Corporation, they're going to be setting up a series of health clinics. They're also donating money that's going to be used to build new schools. This is all along the pipeline area. And one of their, I mean, the whole point of that is basically to try and get the local people to back the project. If they're going to be getting at least a new school in their village or a health clinic, two things that have been sorely lacking in Burma for a long time are education and healthcare. Very low amounts of spending. So to have those things donated by this Chinese company will lessen the blow at least.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Daniel, good luck with your reporting. Daniel Schearf, VOA Bangkok correspondent.
My pleasure.
This is On Assignment, and I'm Iran Siddiqui here with Alex Villarreal. Antonio Patriota is the foreign minister of Brazil, the largest country in South America and the 5th largest in the world. Once a colony of Portugal, Brazil is now among the world's fastest growing economies.
VOA's Carol Castiel recently sat down with Mr. Patriota for a one-on-one interview about his nation's place and interests in the world, and we talked with Carol about it. Let's take a look. I know that this wasn't actually the first time that you interviewed Mr. Patriota. You talked to him before in 2008 when he was Brazil's ambassador to the United States. What's changed for Brazil since then?
Well, I think Brazil has just continued to become a major player on the world stage. Brazil is now really looking further afield. Even in the Middle East, they're interested also in playing a role in brokering peace in the Middle East.
In particular, in Brazil's case, we feel that the Security Council should have a more active role dealing with this. You know, it is the potentially most destabilizing issue on the international peace and security agenda, and yet it's not really being discussed. You're correct in saying that Brazil has recognized Palestinian statehood. We believe that the time has come for the international community to incorporate Palestine into the United Nations system more fully, also as a way of nudging the parties forward.
One issue which stands out and which came out in the recent Americas Summit is the fact that Brazil and its other Latin American neighbors are not happy with the fact that Cuba is still an outlier and the fact that the United States still maintains a boycott against Cuba.
Cuba indeed will assume the chairmanship of a new grouping called the Latin American Caribbean Community, CELAC, that was created last year in Caracas. It is fully engaged with all the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. All countries in this region have diplomatic relations with Cuba. The leadership in Cuba is undertaking impressive reforms, updating of their economic model. They're showing a openness to new ideas. And I think this should be encouraged, and the best way to encourage is to incorporate Cuba into the fora that we create for ourselves.
Brazil's economy has really grown dramatically over the past 10 to 12 years. How has the country been able to achieve that?
I think economic policies, political decisions in favor of liberalizing markets, greater trade with other countries.
For the first time in our history, we can contemplate a future without extreme poverty in Brazil. And this could happen within the current mandate of President Dilma Rousseff, maybe a little bit more. We need improved infrastructure. There's an awareness also that for us to be a stronger trading power internationally, our ports, our airports, our roads, our connectivity in South America needs to be improved. And we've established a Council of South American nations that deals with infrastructure to look into international or inter-South American projects in road building and energy and transmission lines that will hopefully create an integrated South America within 10, 20 years.
You know, we'll have to be, watching Brazil as it, tries to play that greater and more prominent role on the world stage to see, in fact, if that will come to pass.
What does it feel like to be stuck in between worlds? To feel like you don't fully belong in either place? That is the difficult subject photographer Pete Pin wants to document.
And Pin is a Cambodian American in New York documenting the lives of Cambodians in America. In this week's full feature story, Brian Calvert takes a look at the project called Displaced. Let's roll it.
Pete Pin is on a quest. The 30-year-old photographer is searching for his heritage amid the Cambodian enclaves of America. Along the way, he is documenting dislocation. Today, he has come to a Cambodian temple in the Bronx neighborhood of New York City.
This temple is the center of the Cambodian community, and it's very, very small, as you can see. There's only one monk here, and it's carved out in the space here in this neighborhood where it's you know, there's this backyard here, and right outside it's someone else's backyard. There's a very amazing sense of community in the Bronx.
Only a few hundred Cambodian families live in the Bronx. This temple is a main center of worship for them. It is the Cambodian New Year, and these boys are learning to write in Khmer, the language of their motherland. These are the moments Pin seeks to capture as he puts together a growing exhibition for Cambodians in America, for those back home, and for non-Cambodians who may not understand the difficulties Cambodian refugees have had in the U.S. But Pin, whose parents survived the Khmer Rouge, also shoots to find a part of himself.
The name of the project is Displaced, you know, and what that really means is there's this physical displacement in terms of what it means to be a refugee. You know, I can't say myself that I'm physically displaced, because I'm not. You know, I'm American. This is my home. But I am culturally displaced. I exist in this vacuum of identity where I don't know what it means to be either fully American or Cambodian. And in addition to that, you know, there's this legacy that I have, you know, in my heart, on my shoulders, that was given to me at birth as a result of, you know, what my parents lived through. And I am trying, you know, for most of my adult life to really understand what that means.
Today, what that means is a short language lesson of his own, once the camera is put away. Brian Calvert for VOA News, Bronx, New York.
And that's our show for today. Imran and I will be back next week with another program, and we'll tell you then about how Indonesia is trying to deal with the problem of kids who are hooked on cigarettes.
Well, I can relate to that, but you can find all of our episodes of the program tab at voanews.com and also on Facebook and YouTube. From all of us at On Assignment, thanks for watching. See you next time.